Muy bien. Bueno, pues buenas tardes.
Right.
Vamos
Good
a dar
afternoon,
comienzo a
everyone.
nuestra sesión de trabajo
Let's begin our
del
meeting.
Grupo de Trabajo de Seguridad Alimentaria.
The Working Group on Food Security.
En primer lugar, muchas gracias a todos ustedes por participar en este
First
trabajo.
of all, thank you
Quiero agradecer
for being here.
la presencia de nuestros oradores invitados.
I'm glad that we have our special guest here, Christine Lang, Head of Division for the Latin American and Caribbean sector at the EIB. Then we have Luciana Binaghi from the Support and Coordination Unit of the Secretariat for Cooperation, SEGIB. Then we have Barbara Villar, Specialist in Public Policies, FAO Regional Office, FAO RLC. Then we have Luis González Muñoz, Director of Technical Engineering and Social Action at Action Against Hunger Spain. So thank you so much for being here today. Today's meeting is taking place at an important moment for our regions and for our ties, just a week after the CELAC summit. Food security is an issue that's been on our mind, that is of concern to both regions. And we know that this is a complex issue. We know that food security is not an easy subject. It affects millions of people. Millions are still affected by malnutrition. Alas, this number is going up again. In addition, there are problems such as prices going up and supply problems due to the cruel war caused by the criminal invasion of Ukraine by Russia. Today, more than ever, it's a pleasure to see that we have important actors with us today who can debate this report with us. Like all of our other meetings, this meeting is being web-streamed and is being recorded. It will then be published on our internet and intranet. Unless there are objections, we'll continue with the agenda. Of course, the first thing we have to do is to approve the agenda. You've been given the agenda. I just want to check whether you have any comments. If you don't, then the agenda is deemed approved. We now have to approve the minutes from December 22 for the meeting held in Brussels on that day. You should have all received the minutes of that meeting. Are there any comments? No? If you wish to make any changes to the minutes, then please send in those changes to the Secretariat by email by 10 o'clock tomorrow. Otherwise, they will be considered as approved. Item number 3 now. Chair's announcements. As is the case with all the other meetings, we have a limited amount of time, 2 hours. It's not an excessive amount of time, but it's enough. So each invited guest will have up to 15 minutes for their presentation. Then anyone else who wants to take the floor has 3 minutes. So this strict timing is linked to the interpretation and the need to finish on time. Now I'd like to give the floor to my co-chair. That will be an opportunity for him to say a few words and to give the floor to our guests. Thank you very much. Mr. Luis González Muñoz will have to rush off after he's taken the floor. Because of that, we'll let him speak first. And then any questions to him can be asked, can be raised. So let's give the floor to Mr. Muñoz, and then we will continue with the rest of the meeting. Thank you so much for allowing Action Against Hunger to participate in this important forum. It's the second time that we've been invited. We're so glad that we're able to participate, and we're seen as an expert organization in the area of food security. Now, I'm a technical director in Action Against Hunger. Action Against Hunger is an international organization. We work in more than 150 countries. Our mission is to deal with the root causes of hunger and to deal with the effects thereof. In 2022, we were helping some 28 million people and working with a budget of 150 million euros. We have some 9,000 employees, or people we work with, and 90% of those people are local. What we do in our organization is as follows. We're focused on analyzing the main causes of hunger, so violence, conflict, economic crisis, climate crisis. All of this can affect local regions and territories. Then, based on the effects that we've identified, we come up with projects which are multi-sectoral, which look at nutrition, health, water, hygiene, protection, food provision. So a multifactorial program. The aim is to reduce hunger and to come up with solutions which will reduce hunger. So we're trying to improve food security and the nutritional profile of that's what we're all doing, and that's also in line with SDG 2. So I don't want to have an agricultural, agronomic approach because we have the FAO here with us. I wanted to tell you about a humanitarian response which 2016, since the Istanbul conference, since then, the aim was to put people at the center. The aim was to ensure that people are more empowered in decision-making and in about the support they get. So we're interested in multi-purpose cash assistance, monetary transfers. So these transfers are multi-purpose transfers. And so these transfers add to existing social protection. These cash assistance programs are a tool providing support, and the aim is to provide cash directly. That means they can then buy products or services. These multi-purpose cash assistance programs account for 19% of the support. As I say, they account for 19% of international aid. This is a sizable chunk, especially if you compare with 2016. So the use of these cash transfers is going up in terms of volume, but in percentages, it's stagnating. So if we truly unleash the power of this tool, if we truly make the most of cash transfers across the board, then 30% of humanitarian aid would be this kind of program. Multi-purpose cash transfers have been designed to cover all or some of the basic needs of persons. That can be the case after major incidents, coups, pandemics, natural disasters. We determine the value of the transfer based on the difference between the average family income and the value of a basic basket of goods. We also take the poverty threshold and the minimum wage into account. So all of this is key, so that we provide an adequate response together with the authorities. The aim is that these cash transfers be a top-up, be something additional to existing social protection. So it's something that you wouldn't normally get as a recipient. So there's no strings tied to these cash transfers. The person who receives the cash can use them based on their needs. Now, what are the main advantages of this kind of aid? What's good about it is they're more flexible. You're independent. It meets people's needs. And it allows them to be dignified. It allows them to choose. It empowers them. Especially when we're talking about women. This kind of transfer really has a major impact, because she's receiving this income over a specific amount of time. It may allow her to take decisions more easily, to take a leadership role, to decide on how to use the money. So this doesn't just have an individual impact, it doesn't just have an impact on a family, it also makes local markets more resilient, and it stimulates the economy. The hallmark of these transfers is that they have a psychological impact, because it's not traditional aid. It allows these people to receive the money and use it as part of their economic recovery. So when can you use this kind of cash transfer? Where you have a monetized local economy and where there is access to markets. It's so important that both those criteria be in place. There needs to be availability of services and goods as well. If you're going to implement this kind of cash transfer system, then you need to work with the local authorities, and it needs to be recognized as a good option. Of course, you always have to comply with national legislation, and there mustn't be any legal obstacles to the implementation of such a system. This kind of system must be delivered by trusted financial systems. You know, we've got the UNHCR, we've got other humanitarian organizations who are working on this. And thanks to them, we see that these multi-purpose cash transfers are having a major impact on an individual, family, and community level. The payout of these transfers are monitored. So we monitor by distribution. Basically, that means we're seeing how these transfers can impact food security. And we do that based on various indices, such as quality of diet. So families generally use this cash assistance to cover their basic needs, their basic food needs. And often, there are other measures in place too, where there is a promotion of healthier diets, which should help to increase food security within the home. The fact that there's no strings tied means that it gives a boost to the labor market because you know that your basic needs are covered. So that means the recipients can focus on finding a job, or they can make small investments. It also has another impact. It means that people have more savings and less debt, because the most vulnerable people often deal with a major concern. The fact is, they're often highly indebted. This kind of system also makes people feel less insecure, it improves their well-being, and it's basically an economic buffer. You know that every month, for a determined period, you're going to receive this money, so it helps you feel less stressed when you're facing uncertainty. It also makes you feel better about your life. That's based on qualitative studies by Action Against Hunger in the regions where we pay out these cash transfers. One final thing that's important to underscore. This system doesn't just help deal with food insecurity. It also gives families other services, water, hygiene, education, the list goes on. We know that the most vulnerable families often spend a high percentage of their income on food, water, and health. We know that there's a great deal of pressure to ensure you have safe water, and we know there's a lot of financial pressure to get access to healthcare. Often you have to travel kilometers and kilometers. So that's another reason that supports these cash transfers. We've looked at the cost-benefit analysis of this kind of system as well. We see that there is a high yield, a high return on investment, but you don't need a lot of infrastructure. So you really get a lot of bang for your buck. It's also easy to scale up. And in addition to cash transfers, they're often linked with other measures, such as awareness raising on diets. There's also nutritional information provided. So all of that can really have a major positive impact on those who are recipients. Now, to wrap up, what are the current challenges that we have to contend with? So what are we dealing with in terms of challenges? So we have to end this belief that cash transfers are risky, that they are riskier than other systems. We have to end that belief. We must also recognize the role and the added value of NGOs as they implement these programs. This added value means that we can reach places where normal institutions don't reach. So we are able to help more people and provide more value. There's another challenge, which is the need for greater flexibility as regards the funding and the implementation of these programs. We should also increase the link with existing social protection programs. Governments are doing their all, in many cases, to implement more robust welfare systems or social security systems. So these transfer systems are a boost, are a top-up. Finally, there is a need to have more evidence on the outcomes of these cash transfer programs, particularly checking how these transfers help with closing the gender gap and help to empower women. So I've run through my presentation. I really wanted to tell you about these transfers. Humanitarian organizations are using these kinds of programs more and more, together with American and European humanitarian organizations. What's so important is these transfers link up to existing social programs, and what's important is that we continue with them. So I managed to do that in 14 minutes and 11. Thank you very much, Mr. Munoz. Those were really valid arguments, and thank you for sticking to time. So as you've got limited time, we're going to now open the floor to questions for Mr. Munoz. Go ahead.
¿No tenemos preguntas? ¿Sí?
No one? Oh, we do.
Sí. La señora Barandica.
Barandica. Thank you very much. Mr. González Munoz. So you've got some data, and I wonder whether that data is broken down by data. So do we see who the recipients are? You know, you say this allows for greater dignity. It allows people to boost their savings, to invest more. So have you got this broken down by gender? Because you've got reports that say that women use this resource better. So do you have this data? Is anything changing? Are we changing anything? Can we change anything? Are there other questions? Go ahead, Mr. Angel.
You allow I speak in English. You mentioned that the linkage with the social protection system is so important. I can understand that, that's important, but then the very vulnerable, where there is no social protection services, will they not be excluded if this would become a condition more and more to link it with social protection systems? That would be my first question. And then also, I think digitalization here plays a big role with the phones and digital cash. Is how much percentage of all the money you send is now digital, or how does the system work?
¿Alguna otra pregunta?
Anyone else? If not, then we turn back to you, Mr. González Munoz. You've got 5 minutes. Thank you very much. So the first question. Hunger bears the face of a woman. We see that whenever we analyze the technical solutions, whenever we look at the threat of hunger, we realize that we shouldn't just have a gender-based approach. We should see gender as cross-cutting. So when it comes to cash transfers have a major impact on empowerment because they allow you to access this financial resource, albeit sporadically. And then you also can decide yourself on how you spend this money. So if we want to look at differences between men and women, there are analyses that show the following. There's a greater impact on families if the woman is in control of the money than if the man is in control of it. That's what the studies show. And then as regards empowerment, what we're trying to do with our programs is to try to close the gender gap. But it's not just about acceptance, it's about decision-making, the fact that women can make a decision. And often, many of these people have small businesses, so that helps deal with access to labor. So this is our focus whenever we do a study. So we have studies that show when we spend money, it does yield results. And then also it has a positive impact psychosocially. So there are women who have to care, they're caregivers. And so this money really helps them because they know that they have a buffer. Then there was the second question about digitalization. At the moment, most of the monetary transfers are global, are still done by bank service providers, offices, agencies. But we have got some experiences of transferring money by using mobile phones. But generally, we use banks or micro service providers at a local level. Thank you very much. Mr. González Muñoz.
Con su muy oportuna.
Thank you for this insightful presentation that opened our exchange of views on concrete opportunities for international cooperation to support SDG 2 results of the second Global Parliamentary Summit against Hunger and Malnutrition that took place in the month of June in Valparaiso in Chile, with the Parliamentary Pact as a roadmap, and that we as members of Parliament must use as our way forward. We know that the world is far from being able to eradicate hunger by 2030 and malnutrition too. World hunger is much beyond the levels that we saw prior to COVID-19, and around 783 million people suffered from hunger in 2022. And I would say that Latin America has more than 60 million people that live below food security, which is an extremely high figure for the region. Over the course of recent years, we've seen that agricultural systems on a global scale are much more interconnected, and they are much more vulnerable because of climate change and extreme climate events, conflicts, and economic shocks. Now, we need to make sure that we would be able to have better access to food, but nonetheless, one of every 3 people suffer from some form of malnutrition. Food security is a complex and multi-dimensional issue, and there are many cross-cutting factors. For example, poverty, the urban-rural gap, gender, we've already said that, climate, conflict, etc. And for that reason, we need to make efforts and initiatives worldwide to safeguard food security. And there are many, and there are many multi-sectoral ones. And they bring into the mix players as well as people from NGOs, governments, international organizations, civil society, and the private sector as well. There are so many different players that are involved, and that means that we have to make sure that we're being consistent in policy across the board, globally, regionally, nationally, subnationally, and locally. Therefore, one of the points that was put into the World Parliamentary Pact to fight hunger and malnutrition states clearly the need to establish new alliances amongst key players and to strengthen intersectoral and intergovernmental coordination. This approach, known as multi-party governance, is a collaborative and cohesive process in which different groups and sectors that are involved in the area work to share their knowledge, know-how, and individual resources to move beyond any obstacles and to make sure that they strike their priorities and meet them, carrying out different roles and also having an accountability. Now, the experts here today have various roles in world governance and in fighting food insecurity, and such an honor, therefore, for us to be able to learn from their experience and practice. We've already had the chance to hear from Mr. González Muñoz, who used his 15 minutes. Now we will hear from the other presenters, and then we will have an exchange of views. Therefore, along the same lines, we will give 15 minutes to the next speaker, and We hope we will then have time for a debate, 3 minutes for a question without any right of reply for any of the members of the Parliament that should like to participate in the debate at that time. Now, I'd like to thank again Mr. González Muñoz and then invite our next speaker, Ms. Kirsten Lang, who has 15 minutes available to her for a presentation. Thank you very much for the invitation today. I know that there were some people that were present at our conversation yesterday, so you will note perhaps some repetition in my remarks in some aspects. We are from the European Investment Bank. It is held by EU capital, and it gives assistance in development outside of Europe, without Europe, for project purposes. Last week, we were present at the summit. During that summit, the Global Gateway Investment Agenda was launched for Latin America. In every country, projects were selected in concert with the government. Now, what I'd like to discuss with you this afternoon is what we are doing essentially in the EIB and how we approach fighting hunger and malnutrition. It's another way of approaching the subject matter, as it were. We just heard, for example, a presentation, a very detailed one at that. For example, with these cash transfers, so an individual receives some cash and then may use that, but I'm going to be discussing it in a different way, from a different angle. In the Global Gateway, there are various aspects that are very much linked to this subject matter, and that it must be fair, green, and digital. For example, in the questions that were put, we know that this is a subject of great importance. Now, in the EIB, I'm going to read in English what we have stated on this because the words are very precise.
Feed an expanding population, livelihood for farmers, protect the environment, using technology and innovation to deliver nourishment without harming the planet. Quiere decir que nosotros tenemos que balancear.
That means that we need to find a way to balance providing food, job creation, the livelihood of farmers, and all the while protecting the environment. And all of these areas must be balanced. We also need to look to technology and innovation to be able to achieve this balance. It's complex. As we've seen with the war in Ukraine, that had a huge impact in Latin America with energy prices. That has had fallout on farm products. And with the demand of biofuels, for example, we're using, therefore, crops for biofuels, climate change and El Niño. We've seen that impact in Latin America with drought and the price of fertilizers. I'll give you an example that explains the impacts. In La Lucha, we went to see a banana cooperative that, via the Development Bank in San Lucia, receives a loan to assist these people. They stated to us that what they saw was that cooperatives, business owners, had a certain amount of money for the purchase of fertilizer. With the increase of price, that meant that they had to buy less. And so that meant that they had to use fertilizer sparingly. So what is the impact? Well, less profitability and less ability to use fertilizer in the future, and that triggers a vicious cycle. So this shows that access to finance is crucial to be able to assist these small businesses to be able to have access to finance so that they can make these purchases that they need. For example, fertilizers, such important products as they are. Now, as we talk about big projects, broad ones, it's true that the bank finances all types of projects. We've discussed, for example, sustainable farming. And with the knowledge that water is scarce and that there's forestry issues, precision farming, for example, is one example where you use technology to carry out precision farming. Organic farming practices. With crop production. And then there are logistical issues. Logistical issues are fundamental, such that you produce products and then you need to be able to transport them. So you need the infrastructure, terminals, agro-industrial areas, hubs, and how to be able to strengthen that. This can be done by assisting SMEs or control and verification mechanisms and improving them. Another issue can be projecting natural resources, nature-based solutions, payment for ecosystem schemes. This is how we refer to them, and we analyze this as well. When it comes to rural infrastructure, we discussed, for example, water and sanitation, an extremely important issue when you have drought, for example, or when there is flooding that can also have an impact on yields. Well, we know we need innovation, but you need research and investment, therefore, in that R&D. And wherever possible, we use any digital breakthroughs. These are some of the examples where we see future projects. Now, within the context of climate change, environment, and health, I'd like to give you an example of something we're doing in Latin America. At the outset, I talked about malnutrition. In Ecuador, they see this as something that is very much interlinked with vaccines and health. During COVID, for example, they used funding for the purchase of vaccines for COVID, and we were able to finance 6 million to be able to fund the vaccination campaign of youth in Ecuador. Now, when it comes to water, we have many projects in water and sanitation and flood prevention. Two projects that I'd like to give to you by way of example. The first is related to IFAD, International Fund for Agriculture, IFAD, for Agricultural Development. And here we have a loan that will aim to increase farm yields and to strengthen the value chains and also strengthen resilience. We usually like to refer to resiliency when we talk about our investments. It's an important concept there. So this project has been initialed, signed, and we're beginning to disperse these funds. The second example that I wanted to give to you this afternoon is in Argentina. This project is on our webpage, so there's nothing confidential here. This is an approval process ongoing. It's a farming program, a rural program. It's like with IFAD that we're looking to strengthen the value chain as well as try to improve rural production. But there's also a huge gender aspect to this. Who's working the land? How is the interaction structured in a gender way, if that could have a negative impact? And can this project adapt such that everyone can have the same benefit from this project? So I'd like to go back to something that I said yesterday. It's something important, so I know there's a bit of a repetition here. It's a fair transition mitigation here. This is important. But we're also talking about fair resiliency, and there we're talking about adaptation. So it's true that we have communities that are going to have a greater impact because of climate change. And therefore, we have to think about how we can organize programs that will be a benefit to all, and so that it's fair to all and leave no one behind. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Kirsten Lang. You even used less time than was allocated to you, and therefore we will go directly to Ms. Luciana Bignaghi. The floor is yours, madam. Hello. Good afternoon to one and all. Thank you so much for the invitation to be a part of you in this working group on food security. On behalf of the Secretary General of the Inter-American Bank and on behalf of the Secretary General who couldn't be with us, I'm here on their behalf. And so it's good that I have a presentation to be able to share with you, and so that I will feel a little bit more sure on my feet. So I'd like to talk to you a little bit about what our Secretary General does in the Inter-American We are an international organization that supports the 28 countries in the Ibero-American Conference. 19 of them are in Latin America, 3 are in Europe, Spain, Portugal, and Andorra. And we support them in the head of state and government summits. We assist them in their mandate, and every time that there is a summit, then we hold a number of meetings. No, not just within the public sector. You can see that here. For example, on our graph, yes, there are meetings with heads of state and government, but also with regional representatives and ministers, also with civil society. And the 2030 agenda, we're working in several forums with citizens, with parliaments, with businesses. So what exactly is our dynamic? What we're trying to do is come up with strategic alliances, multidimensional, multi-sectoral ones at that, to see where in our community in Ibero-America we can do this. It's an excellent environment for that. And then when we have the heads of state and government summits, we inform on that. When we look at food security, 4 months back, we adopted a document on this subject at our summit, and this was built over the course of a year of work, a group of countries on a voluntary basis that were part of the 11th summit of farm ministers. And they basically homed in on things that you know extremely well, that the situation had got worse because of the pandemic, that Ibero-America was an area that really was harshly impacted, with some 20% in deaths, and that this had a huge impact also of hunger. And we have to also, of course, factor all of this in. We know the war in Ukraine or against Ukraine. both countries are exporters for the region, and so the fall in those exports is currently having a huge impact on the value chain and the production chain, and having also an impact on inflation. We know that that was already hard enough as it was for the region. Many citizens are finding it hard to have access to fresh staple products. And in some countries where that are products, we see that there's an increase in the prices can be positive, but those countries that are only consuming countries, the increase in prices has a negative impact. In our roadmap, we are looking also at waste. We know that there is some 8% of food waste, and we know that in LAC, more than 12% of food is waste between farm and farm to fork is lost along the way. And recently, also, we looked at, of course, climate change that has a huge impact across the board, but in Latin America, no less, especially in the farming sector. Climate change, of course, part and parcel of that. Now, with all of this context, we are a group of countries that worked from April 2022 to March 2023. They had the assistance of FAO, and we know how that they are real points of reference in this area. And in March, in 2023, we adopted the document. This was adopted by the heads of state and government. I just need assistance with this slide. Next slide, please. Apologies for that. Here you can see our summit, a photo of the heads of state and government. Here is the road map with 25 undertakings that were adopted to make our systems more sustainable. So the first was to strengthen trade and the development of resilient supply chains. Now, according to the source that we have, trade within the bloc of the region is quite low, 14 to 18%, compared to some 60% with the EU. So the heads of state and government have focused on strengthening South-South cooperation, so assisting with plant protection as well as with sanitary aspects. The health, the nutrition of the products, not just for the region, but also for export, and to give impetus to with a harmonization of our customs arrangements, because it's sometimes easier to trade outside of the bloc than within the bloc, and also try to assist in supporting women in rural areas. We know, like my colleague said, that women are an important part of rural life, and often we can see that there can be problematic issues related to land ownership, and so the roadmap aims to try to assist in the recognition of women there and make sure that they are very much involved in these businesses. Supporting family farming. According to FAO, more than 80% of agriculture production comes from family farms, and around 70% of the yield in the region. So we also know to assist with public funding, access to public procurement, consumer protection. also the logging of these families. If we have a register of them, it will be of assistance for the business, and to have that dialogue with the individuals. Often what you can see is that the dialogue isn't happening with the right people, so therefore it's hard to know exactly what the precise needs are. And then it's also important to promote the best use of fertilizers. We know with the war there have been problems with fertilizers, but there are many alternatives that could be used in our area of the world. Another thing that we can do is expand access to finance, much along the lines of what my colleague said. If you don't have investment, if you don't have funding, it's impossible to come up with a green transition or to come up with a sustainable food system. So yes, countries via this also are trying to focus on access to fund, multilateral, mixed types of financing, to come up with new types of financial instruments, to make sure that there's a rapid access to public-private funding, and to have access to that $1 billion up to 2025 for mitigation of climate and adaptation for climate change. Also, digital infrastructure must be strengthened in the region. So there is a slow but sure progress in startups and new types of technology. So it's extremely timely to strengthen the system, to use that technology, to increase yields, to best use water, and to have access to information from small producers. When people have good information, they know when they can invest, when they can produce, when they can sell, and when it's best not to do that. Also, making sure that we know that there is a triple gap, gender one, as well as a digital. We need to make sure that there's access to trade and to business in the rural area, and to strengthen exchanges in the region for better connectivity. So what are we looking to do in the next steps? So this document was approved in March 2023. So next, the presidency will go to Ecuador for the pro tempore presidency. So they will be coordinating the activities all the way up till the next summit that will take place in November. Sometime around November, December, we're going to have a meeting. So because of elections, there's a bit of a stagnation. So what we'll try to do is to keep working on these specific approaches and arrangements that the heads of state and government adopted. With FAO, we're working on a joint roadmap with the educational and technical assistance. So we need to have these partners that are more expert than we are in the food area, and so their input is necessary. And when it comes to South-South and triangular cooperation, we'll be looking to that. For 14 years now, we have been working on a number of different initiatives. More than 11% of them deal with agrarian projects. So we're looking to where we could perhaps broaden that. Finally, we're working on a report in terms of the supply that we have in agricultural technology, what we have, what could be done, and how governments could make the best decisions on this. So I will conclude. I'm not exactly sure how much time I have, but we do know that food security and lack thereof is something that we all have to work together. It's a shared responsibility. It's global, and that there's no way that we can take this on individually. Therefore, what we're doing is looking at food security, placing it, yes, we know it's been on the global agenda since 2000 with the SDGs, but it's the first time that we actually have come up with a roadmap, an idea of where we're going. So it's the highest level of political commitment that we can have, And we're trying very much to move to the next state for implementation with the assistance of the private sector, governments, and multilateral organizations. Thank you so much for this, for your attention. I hope that I was clear. And thank you for your kind attention.
Sí, muchas gracias, la señora.
Thank you very much, Madam. We now give the floor to Barbara Villar. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd really like to thank EuroLat for inviting us to this important working group on combating hunger and ensuring food security within EuroLat. Really want to thank Soraya Rodriguez, the chair of the Latin American component, the EU component. We were able to work with her back when she was a member here in Parliament. I also want to thank Mr. Rolando Gonzalez, President of Palatino. We worked and do work hand in hand with him on all of these issues. I also want to thank Mr. Anders Hill, the President of the Senate, who's made this event possible. And I really want to thank everyone else who's made this event possible. So, on behalf of our regional director, Maria Lubecki, I want to express her heartfelt thanks. She can't be here, unfortunately. And we have Mr. Luis Lobo, who coordinates support for Latin America and the project Latin America Without Hunger. So I'm going to tell you about the project Latin America Without Hunger. So that's something we've been working on for 15 years, and we're doing that with the support of Spain. So it's something we work on in 15 Latin American countries. So what we do is we focus on SDG 2, dealing with hunger and nutrition, and we put SDG 2 within the heart of public policy in those 15 countries. So we carry out that work, and then it's also been taken up here in the Spanish Parliament and also in the Portuguese Parliament. So they've got a project on food security and gender equality. So we've got this project which helps us to cross the ocean. Before I move on to another subject, I'll just say that these parliamentary projects which deal with hunger include some 100 laws on the right to food and nutrition. So these are tangible measures which really improve people's lives in Latin America. So we see adverse conditions throughout the world. We see climate change, which is affecting production methods. Against that backdrop, Latin America and the Caribbean have specific challenges in order to deal with the scourge of malnutrition. Now, some of the figures have gone down. So 1.7% in 2021. The figures have gone down, but still there are 43.2 million people who deal with malnutrition or hunger in Latin America and the Caribbean, some 40 million people. Then there are also children who are under the age of 5 who are underweight, some 8.6 of them. But the world average is just 5.6 of overweight children under 5. So we have more overweight children in this part of the world. So that means we're not going to meet SDG 2 in Latin America. So that's why some criticisms have been leveled about what's happening in Latin America. That's why we need to step up multilateral action. We need to have more alliances between parliaments so that nobody's left behind. So if we're going to deal with this problem, then we need to make dealing with malnutrition a political priority. So it needs to be dealt with legislatively, in budget terms and in monitoring terms. So it's not just about coming up with laws to deal with this issue. There needs to be follow-up, ensure that there's actual application. Then we need to ensure that there are political, technical and economic means to change food systems. Food systems need to become more resilient, be more inclusive and be more sustainable. You know that any work we do on this issue needs to be done hand in hand with academia, civil society, and the executive. That will help us to deal with the numbers and the causes of this crisis. So this parliamentary work was supported in the EU CELAC summit. So there, at that summit, food and nutrition was recognized as transversal, but parliamentary diplomacy was also recognized as a priority in bi-regional ties. That's why this particular working group, that's why all of you are so important in these current times of food insecurity. The fact is, you've got a mandate. You can promote interparliamentary diplomacy. You can come up with coordination and consensus, and you can push for a political agenda which will help SDG 2 to be achieved. So that's why you are a reference when it comes to EU Latin American coordination. You know, as we heard from the president of the Palatino Parliament, there's many areas where you work together. So I just want to remind you of the second World Summit, which was held in July. There, many parliaments agreed on a pact to deal with hunger and malnutrition. As part of that pact, there were actions on how to transform food and agricultural systems and how to ensure the right to food for all people. And one of the milestones of this pact, or one of the parts of this pact, is that all institutions are being called on, especially if you're a donor. So they're all being called on to stick to the measures laid down in this pact, promoting international cooperation with a view to achieving this pact. Before I wrap up, let me call on you. Continue to make food security a political priority. Let's have constant exchange of views, as we are doing today. Let's also promote this exchange of views back and forth. Ida y vuelta, it's called. We need to also continue to gather data and evidence. Then you, we, and society will be in a place to make better decisions. And we also need more internal and external alliances so that we can help society in this fight. So we need you. And from the regional office of the FAO, let me tell you that we're fully available to work with you so that we can work on the agenda of your working group. First of all, finally, I want to thank all members who are here, who are really going the extra mile. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, señora.
Thank you very much, Ms. Villar. That was interesting. And you were so quick that you gave up some of your time. So we have a complex backdrop here. Different situations, different problems, different ways of dealing with food insecurity and ensuring access to wholesome food. Now we'd like to hear from the members. So I'm going to... I was going to take the floor, but women first. No, you take the floor first. I just wanted to stress the importance of not overlooking the fact that this issue has historical roots. This all didn't come out of nowhere from the pandemic and the war. There was hunger before that. There's no doubt about it. These two events have worsened the situation, but they're not the root cause. The issue is inequality. We have to identify inequality and other causes which have led to this issue. I think we might need to rethink the whole structure of the global food production chain. The center of gravity was always the market. Okay, the market is something we can't do without, but perhaps we need to shift the center of gravity to production and to meeting needs. Because we mustn't forget that the right to wholesome food is a vital human right. So this is initial thinking. We need to focus on production, but not overlook the market. Then there's also the issue of family farming. Of course, we do need large-scale farming. We will continue to be dependent on it. But if we can empower family farms, men and women, if we can enable them to produce for themselves, and if they can then produce enough for the market too, then that will ensure their livelihood, but it will also do more. There's no doubt about it. This is a multifactorial issue. It involves the environment and climate. So we need to find environmentally friendly responses. Hopefully we can then move away gradually from chemicals, and hopefully we can promote regenerative agriculture. Perhaps it might produce a little less. We might be producing a bit less, but there'll be organic products, there'll be more wholesome foods, and we'll be using products that have less of an impact on the soils. I didn't want to get on my soapbox. I really wanted to thank the panelists for their excellent presentations. And I think we all need to ensure that people fully enjoy their right to food. And that means consolidating the food sovereignty of our nations. It doesn't mean not being dependent on each other. It doesn't mean not trading. But it does mean having more solid farming systems. So we want to have healthier food systems which are environmentally friendly and which help to ensure that people have their right to food upheld. Now I'm going to give the floor to our co-chair, and it's my pleasure to give her the floor. We're going to open the debate now, but just let me thank everyone who spoke. If there's a message we want to send, and we've heard from a wide range of actors on sustainability and nutrition, and the fact is, hunger and malnutrition in this world are complex issues. I think my colleague, the co-chair, put it really well. It's not just about increasing or boosting production of foodstuffs. No. What we really need to do is look at other factors which involve other actors. There's the issue of distribution, retail, poverty levels. All of these are linked to persistent issues. You just pointed this out. You know, this issue is a political priority, but there's been a collapse. There's been a real upending of the agri-markets because of the invasion of Ukraine. But even before the Ukraine war, there were some 820 million people going hungry. The figure had improved a little bit from 2015 to 2020, but then things got worse again. This is a shocking figure. This is a terrible figure. It shows our very failure as a civilization, as a political community. But the aim is to get rid of hunger by 2030. If we continue at this rate, if we continue doing the same as we've always done, then the studies show that by 2030, there will be another 160 million people going hungry. That will be 8% of people on this planet. But when we talk about people who don't have access to staples, let's not forget that many of them are dealing with food insecurity. Food insecurity doesn't necessarily kill you, but there are millions of people affected by food insecurity, and they can't eat a meal at each mealtime, or they can't fill their shopping basket. They can't have a dignified life. Their children can't flourish. These men and women can't go about their daily lives normally, and that's terrible. And this food insecurity compromises people's lives, and it really compromises the countries where food insecurity has higher levels. So we've heard from different panelists, and they were talking time and time again about food and agri-systems. Food and agri-systems encompass agricultural policy, processing, and more than that. You know, some people spoke about more sustainable farming, more resilient farming. So there's public policy here. And then the FAO has spoken about how there needs to be specific measures for farmers in every corner of the world so that farmers are able to produce better. At the same time, there's the issue of distribution of goods throughout the market, because often the problem isn't lack of food, it's a lack of access to food. So we as parliamentarians want this to be a permanent working group, a permanent forum. That would be great, because it would complement what's being done. We've got various alliances. We've got our own work that was set up in the Spanish Parliament. All of our work in this working group could add to ongoing work so that we can deal with this problem. I think what has helped from the parliamentary perspective has been understanding that this is a problem of rights. So it's not about lack of food, it's about people's rights, right to food not being upheld. Thank you. We'll now open the debate. I think we've got some people who want to take the floor. Questions, comments?
Bueno, buenas tardes. Muchas gracias.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to the panelists, those who have come here to inform us, teach us. And you've done so much work in the background, in the run-up. This is such a complex issue. There's the issue of food sovereignty, fighting against hunger. But things vary within our region. So it's very difficult to have a general outline within a region or within a country. There have been various crises, one on top of each other, Ukraine affecting Latin America and the Caribbean. So we mustn't overlook the problems of Ukraine. So between 2019 and 2021, hunger went up in our region by 30%. We're more dependent on fertilizer inputs and fertilizer imports, as well. And a major issue is access to a good diet, particularly in rural areas. So we've been analyzing how much it costs to feed someone a good diet in Latin America and in Europe. So it actually costs us more in Latin America. It costs us 0.5% more to feed someone a healthy diet. And that's despite the fact that we produce more. So we need to reduce that gap. The fact is, we produce food, but we don't get added value from that food. And then, despite that, people don't have enough food on our continent. So the key is perhaps to process the product or the agricultural good where it's produced. Because if there's first processing, that creates jobs. And then we would be importing less. I think it would also lead to less food losses because of less transport. So I think that's one position to focus on. So I think that's key. But for that, we need to have investment, and we also need to have infrastructure. You know, if you've got energy, if you're competitive, if you've got access to a port, well, we shouldn't just focus on the central ports of Latin America. We need to have better distribution of foodstuffs so as to improve opportunities. There's a lot of data out there. And I don't want to go on and on because I know we're short of time. But we need to look at the medium and long term. And we need organizations to join up and be responsible and accountable to citizens. So if that's going to happen, then the fight against hunger needs to be institutionalized, but we need to work based on consensus. And of course, the legislative powers must represent the will of the people. So really, I would go back again to institutionalizing the approach to dealing with this problem. So if we're going to have sustainability, there also needs to be social sustainability. There needs to be support for beneficiaries. So let's not forget that farming is part of our human history. And let's not forget that history is cyclical. Everything has changed. It's been neoliberalism, changes to the market, to services, and agriculture was forgotten. But now agriculture is coming back to the fore. And there are a lot of hopes for farming and for the countryside. And so farming comes back to the top of the agenda, and it has great prospects. the price of foodstuffs, food as fuel, the issue of climate change, all of that means that farming will have a major role to play.
Yeah, muchas gracias.
Thank you very much.
Was it not? Yeah, voy a hablar en inglés, es más fácil.
I'm going to speak English, it's easier for me.
I would first of all thank the two co-chairs for having invited these excellent panelists and keeping this very important discussion alive. We discussed a lot on the root causes, which is of course the conflict in Ukraine, but also climate change. And I don't have a precise question now, but I want to make a remark or something that worries me. We know that climate change continues and this has a very nefast effect on agriculture. And on the other side, I see in many parliaments, and especially in the European Parliament, but I believe it also exists in national parliaments, the opposition between members of the Agricultural Committee and members of the Environmental Committee. There is constant fighting, and this is really a development which is very worrying. And even farmers are sometimes misused. We had this famous nature restoration law in the last plenary in Strasbourg from the European Parliament, and there was two demonstrations organized outside, one with Greta Thunberg for the people who defend climate, and on the others, farmers who were told if there is too many climate legislation, this is ruining farming. And I think we should bring these two positions together, because if we can continue with this divide, we will never find a solution for climate change. And we know that climate change is creating even more hunger. And therefore, I think we should send a message out that we have to really try not to divide farmers, not to divide our societies on this subject, but that we have to bring them together. And this is, I think, a message which we also should bring into our parliaments and stop these fights and trying to divide the people, because we know that otherwise we're never going to solve this problem. Thank you. It was just a comment I wanted to make, and this makes me very sad to see this division. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, la señora Barandica.
Miss Pibalbandica.
Muchas gracias. Además, que haga muy feliz a mi madre por haberme llamado por el segundo apellido.
Well, you called me Miss Bandica, which is my mother's surname. That's great. You'll make my mother happy there. Now, Miss Binyagi, I'm not sure about the interpretation that's been made. There's a lot of mention made of family farming, farming products, foodstuffs. And you mentioned a country that produces a lot of fisheries products and fisheries. But you didn't mention fisheries. Why didn't you mention fisheries? Because when we talk about food security, we can't just talk about agriculture because of other factors. And then we talk about hunger and the figures. We shouldn't just look at Europe and Latin America. Let's not forget Africa. We need to have perhaps a wider alliance. We need to look beyond these four walls. So that was a comment question. And then it's absolutely clear that we need to have objectives. But there needs to be a new level of governance. Here, of course, we're talking about national parliaments, European parliaments, national governments, European governments, but governance. When we're talking about hunger and governance, we need to include the local and regional levels. Otherwise, we're not going to get close to achieving our goals, because they're most concerned. They know the fields, they know the local territory. They can do something at local level. That's why I think we need to have global goals. That's unquestionable. We all agree with that. But then how do we actually achieve? I think it's absolutely vital that we get the local level on board. Then, just to react to what my colleague was saying, It's true that there's been complicated legislation passing through the Parliament. The ENVI committee thinks that everything falls within its ENVI remit. I'm going to give my side of things here, the other point of view. When you want to achieve a goal, how are you going to achieve that goal? Well, the goal has to be clear, and then you have to have resources to back it up. So the question is, who's paying for this particular measure or law? Any kind of program that you set up costs money. So yes, we do need to ensure environmental recovery because we want to have healthy soils and healthy forests. We all agree with that. We all want to have healthier seas, better fishery stocks, better production. But who's going to foot the bill? So here I'm not just talking about the controversial nature restoration law. I'm talking more broadly. Who's going to foot the bill? Because often it's not clear who's going to foot the bill. You can't have goals if you haven't got clear funding. And this is an issue that is a global issue. That's where we come to loggerheads, because we do agree on measures, we do agree on goals. But of course, there are repercussions which are different from sector to sector. So we need to recognize that and come up with solutions, because I want to do what my colleague was saying. We want to move forward together towards shared goals so as to ensure that climate change doesn't get worse, because we're already in an extreme situation. There's the agri-sector, the fisheries sectors. We want those two sectors and others to be in robust, rude health so that they can supply the world. And then there's this controversial issue of food production, and we produce, but then we don't distribute it fairly. So there we perhaps do need to take a look at ourselves in the mirror. Why are we producing but not distributing it fairly? Thank you very much. Ms. Bilbao Barandica, both your names. Now the floor to Ms. de la Pisa Carrion.
Well, the truth is that I'm really enjoying this exchange of views between members of the European Parliament, subjects that are very heated in the European Parliament. But of course, we all have the same objective. We want to protect the environment and protect the farming and the fishery sectors that mean that we can have food security, as we're all saying today, in all international fora. Now, we've said that we need to have clear objectives and monetary funds, and that we lack both, and then we need something in the middle. So flexible plans that are designed with a results basis. What I see is that the ambition, we always say that we need to be ambitious for an objective, but we don't know the plan. We haven't yet designed the plan for this objective, factoring in that there's much uncertainty in terms of the technology that we're going to use, what type of energy sources will we use, or alternative sources will we have. We don't know if we have, for example, food scarcity on the one hand, we need to be able to supply it on the other. And what we can see is that we might not yet have that other alternative, or we might still be investing in a technology, or the technology is still coming to maturity. But if we have individuals, we need to make sure that we have the ability of these people to transition, to carry out the transition. If we want to achieve this, we're really in early childhood of this in our process towards achieving it. So wouldn't it make sense to come up with flexible objectives, be less ambitious, have pilot projects in smaller areas where we can see where the success is, and then as they're successful, we can broaden them to greater scale so that we don't compromise our economy, because this food security isn't something that is a problem in developing countries. In Europe, we can see that we don't necessarily have enough for livestock because of bad planning in our agrarian sector. So I think it's often useful to have small objectives and then to broaden them as we have a success. When we have a problem with technology, then we can find a solution to that technology and then come up with the investment necessary. But first and foremost, we need to have plans, and when we have success, then we spread that. So we're giving priority to some technology, and we're not sure yet if this type of energy source is going to be the best. We don't know yet. Or the European Parliament or the Commission throws its weight behind something, and then a technology shows that it is not capable, or another technology should be developed, then we are stuck. So we have to be able to find solutions. I believe in the creativity of people. We've always come up with solutions, but what is clear is that competitiveness means that the technology that is the most effective is the one that is going to be most successful. So my conclusion would just be good planning is what we need. Thank you. Would anyone else like to take the floor at this time? Yes, thank you. Patricio, I should like to really state that I think it's important to have this exchange of views and experiences. What we have here are people that are hungry and people that are living with malnutrition. And what politicians are doing, well, their time frame isn't the same. It's not the same as someone who is hungry. The necessity isn't the same as someone who's living with malnutrition. We are from different countries. We have different solutions and different realities. I'm from a country with 30 million. We produce for 30 million. And in Uruguay, we don't have hunger, but we have malnutrition. So the reality is really different. What's important here, then, is I'm from a country. There's some 7 million laws. Not all of the laws necessarily can't necessarily be applied. So we have to look at what is working in different parts of the world to be able to resolve a problem. We know we can't have a full solution. If we had a full solution, we would have a silver bullet. We know that we can't just throw money at things. That won't be enough. So these types of fora are useful to us to exchange experiences. In America, in the parliament, if we see that a law is not complied with, then we see what the reality is and try to come up with solutions to adapt as quickly as possible. Example, in Uruguay, a small country, there's such a huge amount of food waste because the food isn't sold before its expiration date. And in the parliament, they're coming up with a law to find a way to assist with this. So you can look at the law that exists already to find a way to incentivize the fact that it's better to consume food rather than just throw it away. And this is happening in many places. And so I would endorse the idea that we could keep within EuroLat. I'm not sure if it could be here in the Parliamentary Assembly or if we have, we have experience here. So it'd be worthwhile to keep sharing them so that we don't make the same mistakes and exchange in a quickly way. In Latin America, we produce much more than we would necessarily need for all of us to eat, and nonetheless, many people are not living well. Small-scale fisheries, the rules that apply to fisheries, that has an impact on many communities in the Caribbean, for example. But going back to my original idea, I think it would be good to have a forum where we can keep up this exchange of views and exchange of experiences. Thank you. Would anyone else like the floor at this time? I think that everything that has been said is extremely interesting. And I know that we could continue to exchange at length for a long time. Unfortunately, is of the essence, and therefore I think we'll need to conclude. But yes, this is a space that we should continue to have so that we can keep working to keep it alive, to find the synergy necessary to come up with the best policy that is needed and that can be implemented. Now, I'd like to go back to our members of the panel at this time to see if they would like to rebound to any of the questions that were asked or comments that were made. They do not have to, but if they would like to, they may. Who would like to go first?
Bueno, ya que estoy siendo observada.
Well, I can see that you're looking at me. I only wanted to just state what we have had at the FAO in our experience in SDG 2 and what we've worked. For example, Mr. Armando spoke of the law that was implemented in the region. It was extremely useful. There was the climate change and food security law recently passed. It's very innovative, and what it will do will make sure that regional work plans can be worked on and exchanged so that anyone would like to use them as an experience. They can do that. They are not binding. They are an excellent space for dialogue to be able to continue to work on these laws. Now, for your information, some of the things that we are working on and that parliamentarians are working on to fight hunger, laws on family agriculture that is focused on gender and indigenous people, laws on food waste, laws on nutrition, labeling, for example, laws on all of these things. There are many laws that exist, school food programs, for example, where the public procurement has to be local, for example,
¿No?
by virtue generating local wealth. So there's so many laws that exist out there that could be shared if they could be of use for your information. Also, for the 2 last years, we've been working also for the best possible gender mainstreaming. I think that this has been said, fighting that hunger has a female face, and therefore we need to make sure that to achieve SDG 2, we're going to have to mainstream the gender aspect because we won't be able to achieve SDG 2 without that gender mainstreaming. Who else would like to take the floor? Thank you for that comment. I wanted to just flag up that fighting hunger is an opportunity, one to strengthen the infrastructure that we have, to spur job creation, to make sure that people have more income so that they can eat more and better and make sure the system is more resilient. The European Investment Bank stands by to assist the public sector in this investment and also the private sector, because we need the private sector too. And we need to be able to support the wherewithal of the private sector within the individual countries. And we mustn't forget small and medium-sized enterprises because they have a huge role to play. Now, last comment, the need to plan. Planning, yes, is essential. As we've seen, there are many elements that come into play and that can have an impact on the success of a given program. All of these aspects must be brought into consideration, and to what an extent the public sector can play a role. But there might be other elements that might be more related to the private sector. Together, we all need to work to make sure that they are of import for all of us. Thank you. Go ahead. Ms. Bilbao Barandica, I hope I got your name correct. Ms. Barandica, third time's the charm. So, no, we're not focusing just on agriculture. We're trying to have an overarching view of production. Yes, the working group was a voluntary group from ministries of agriculture, and therefore there's more reference to agriculture. But yes, of course, the region and our conference is very much cognizant of the importance of our oceans and that dynamic. I focused more on the agricultural aspect, yes, but I'm very happy to be able to share with you my business card, and then we could also follow up on this. The presentation was meant to go give the broad brushstrokes of what we're doing to come to consensus. There's the importance within the framework of the conference, and then we continue to do this with also the ICAD and with FAO, and we also hope to bring more to the parliamentary aspect. When it comes to the projects, essentially South-South cooperation with various experience. Yes, there are more focused areas, some projects, not pilot projects, but with fewer people perhaps, with just a few representatives. So maybe they're focused more on one thing, weighing in the role of women in fisheries or seeds, for example. More than 11% of the South-South projects are focused on this subject. So yes, they are there. But if we need to look at them in a broader scale, food security in the region, and look at what we could do within the Agenda 2000 with this roadmap to be more effective in a place where we focus on some 22 countries that are completely heterogeneous, and where there is a different approach to farming, for example, where we have farming that makes up 25% in some countries and maybe only 4% in a country like Spain. Now, I would agree with Mr. Angel also, the dichotomy that exists between the environment and farming, and that sometimes they're pitted against each other. And there shouldn't be an enemy on one side or the other. It's necessary, and I hope that I was able to convey this. We know that farming suffers very much from climate change, but it also generates climate change. And therefore, that's an area where technology could improve the situation greatly. I will not expand on this much more. Just to my colleague from Uruguay, I'm from Argentina. In Latin America, we know that we produce more than 2 times as much as food as we need. But we know that there's much waste as well in that farm-to-fork process. So there's much we could do in fighting that waste. We could all work together in how we could implement this plan, and with all of the input and feedback that you've given here this afternoon. Thank you. Again, thank you very much to Mr. González Muñoz for having been here. And I'd also like to thank all of the panel members who are a part of this debate, as well as the members of parliament that contributed to our conversation about the never-ending, as it would seem, fight against hunger and malnutrition. Let's hope that we can move on from that as quickly as possible, sooner or later. The next item on the agenda is any other business. For your information, we are working on the recommendation by the co-rapporteurs, Mr. Zoido Alvarez and Mr. Rodriguez, on Euro-Latin American cooperation in resilience and sustainability of food systems in light of the current food crisis. And we should be able to discuss that at the next EuroLat meeting in the fall. Would you have any other subjects that you'd like us to discuss at that time? Now, I think perhaps we don't need to discuss necessarily a report, a subject for a report, but rather for a debate on. So actually, we could come up with subjects on that would bring in the participation of different actors, and we could give some further contribution to our agenda. What do you think? Would anyone have any suggestions for topics at this time?
Maybe we could have some experts coming and telling us on the impact of technology to our combat. For example, somebody from the European Space Agency, how they monitor the crops, etc., and other experts from different technological fields, how technology can help us to tackle the food crisis, but also the climate, and bring this together. That could be interesting. And in the European Space Agency, for example, they're doing programs, they're working together with FAO, etc. Maybe something like that could be interesting. Or maybe you had it already before, I don't know, I haven't been here that long, but okay?
No hemos tenido...
Mark, we haven't had an expert from the Space Agency or along those lines. We will take note of your suggestion. I was saying we haven't had a session that has been focused specifically on what indeed could be the innovation, new technologies in production or in processing, or the possibility of developing meat from stem cells, for example, in laboratories. These technologies exist there. I think perhaps we could take note of this and perhaps and keep that in mind for possible meetings of the working group. As you all know, the working group was set up fundamentally with one objective, the drafting of this report. This report in our JPA different reasons meant that the report has not yet been finalized. We will, and I hope that in our next meeting we will have finalized it, and then I think the priority will be the various subjects that we have already discussed, that we will continue to see in the future: climate change, the impact on natural resources, soil and water, that are the basic inputs for farming. We know that that is going to continue to be an issue, and so what we could do is continue to make sure this group continues to exist so that we can continue to have these exchanges, and then look at subjects like the interesting one that you just brought up. Because yes, technology comes into play. Many things exist that we don't understand very well. There is high precision farming that exists, and that is changing things much. But this is not just an issue of more food, but more rights, as it were. Thank you. Let us continue with our agenda. Just wanted to remind you that at 8 p.m. the buses will leave the Hotel Torre de Madrid towards the Casa de America for the dinner that has been organized by the Minister for Foreign Affairs, the European Union and Cooperation. The last item on the agenda, date and time and place of our next meeting. The date and time of the next meeting of the EuroLat group, working group on food security. We will know that date at a later time. We will therefore wait for that to be known. Would you like to make any other announcements? We want to thank you very much for having been here with us, all of the members of Parliament. The chair thanks the technical teams and the secretariat, everyone for their excellent work, and he also kindly thanks the interpreters. The meeting stands adjourned.